Chris Doumitt is back, and this time, he's not returning as Parker Schnabel's trusted right-hand man. He's back as the miner who just sent shockwaves through the Klondike, uncovering a staggering $70 million gold discovery. For fans who believed Chris had hung up his shovel for good, the news hit like a thunderclap. Rumors began to echo through mining camps. Doumitt had struck something enormous. Not a fluke, not a rumor, but a find so rich it could rewrite the story of the modern gold rush itself. For years, Chris was the backbone of any crew he joined, the calm, capable hand who could turn failure into fortune. While others hunted for quick ounces, Chris was chasing something deeper. He followed a faded trail, a map scarred by time, and a legend dismissed as pure myth. But now, that myth has become reality. Hidden barrels of raw, untouched gold, sealed since 1898, have resurfaced. And the man who brought them to light is none other than the miner everyone thought was finished. This isn't just another payday in the Klondike. It's a story of redemption, determination, and destiny. A discovery so monumental, it's got miners whispering, rivals plotting, and investors flooding north in hopes of a piece of the action. So buckle up, and if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe, because Chris Doumitt's return is only the beginning of something far bigger. When Chris reappeared, it sent a tremor through the Yukon mining world. He wasn't back for nostalgia, he was back with intent. Old friends remembered his uncanny luck, the man who could find gold where others saw nothing but dirt. They used to call him the man with the golden touch. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, something unfinished. Word spread fast. Chris wasn't back for fame. He was back for a reason. The rumors quickly grew louder. Talk of a hidden $70 million jackpot buried beneath long-forgotten ground, left behind when fortune seekers fled over a century ago. Some laughed it off as miners' gossip, tall tales told around a smoky campfire. But others whispered that Chris had proof, real evidence of an untouched pay layer sealed away when the floods came. Chris never confirmed it, but he never denied it either. And that quiet confidence spoke volumes. Rivals began watching his every move, convinced he'd found a lead that could change everything. Then, the moment came. Chris revealed fragments of a weathered map. Burned at the edges, its ink barely holding on after more than 100 years. It outlined a forgotten shaft, a place sealed in 1898 when winter forced miners to abandon their richest strike. Chris explained how he'd uncovered it, not by luck, but while working a side job in Alaska, tucked inside a crate of relics long left untouched. The moment he unfolded that map, the air in camp changed. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a mission. He knew he couldn't do it alone. So, Chris began calling the few people he still trusted, miners who'd fought alongside him in brutal seasons, men who knew his word was solid. One by one, familiar faces began to show up. But this time, things were different. They weren't the same young dreamers they once were. Some hesitated, wary of chasing a legend instead of a sure thing. Others feared it could all be for nothing, that the golden map might just lead to disappointment. But for Chris Doumitt, walking away was never an option. Would you like me to continue the next part of this story, where Chris's new crew finally breaks ground and faces the first signs that the legend might actually be real? Chris didn't argue or try to convince anyone with words. Instead, he reached into his pack, pulled out several rocks from his test site, and laid them on the table. Under the harsh glow of the camp light, the stones shimmered, veins of free gold running through the gravel like threads of fire. The room went silent. In an instant, skepticism turned to intrigue, and that intrigue sparked something old and familiar. One by one, eyes that had grown tired over the years began to gleam again, the same way they had back when every shovelful of dirt carried the hope of fortune. The fire was back. They weren't following Chris out of loyalty anymore. They were following him because deep down they felt it too, that restless hum of possibility buried beneath the frozen earth. Meanwhile, in nearby camps, rivals laughed at the idea of Doumitt's reunion, mocking the sight of older miners brushing the rust off their gear. They had no clue how close they were to being proven wrong. The team set their sights on the exact location marked on that century-old map. Soon, heavy machinery rolled in, engines growling through the valley and shaking frost loose from the ground that hadn't been disturbed in generations. The dig began with raw power, bucket after bucket tearing through the permafrost until something solid resisted the steel teeth. The excavator halted. As the crew dug by hand, splintered timbers emerged from the frozen dirt. These weren't natural formations. They were remnants of a mine shaft, just where the map had promised. Each strike of the machinery exposed more of the ancient structure, until the outline of a sealed entrance came into view, the wood blackened by time, yet somehow still holding strong. They slowed the work to preserve what lay beneath. Layer by layer, history began surfacing again. Saw marks cut into the beams, rusted nails pounded in by hands long dead. Even the air seemed to shift, heavy, still, as though the ground itself resisted letting go of its secrets. When they finally cracked through the seal, the stale breath of trapped earth and decay poured out, thick and cold. Tests on nearby gravel came back rich, far richer than anyone imagined. The pay layer was dense with gold. The legend wasn't just a rumor anymore, it was real, and they were standing right on top of it. But the deeper they went, the more the land fought back. Invisible gases hissed through fissures, threatening to suffocate anyone who stayed too long. The walls groaned and buckled, dumping dirt mere inches from the crew. Every foot forward felt like a wager against collapse. Then, a discovery froze everyone where they stood. Carved into one of the ancient beams were rough, weather-worn words, etched more than a century ago. The warning read, "Leave or be buried." The message hit, like ice water. Some men stared in silence. Others muttered about old curses and miners who vanished protecting their gold. The atmosphere shifted from excitement to unease. Equipment began to fail, belts snapping, engines sputtering, floodlights dimming, as though the shaft itself was resisting them. The camp filled with whispers. Were they trespassing on something they were never meant to find? But Chris stood unshaken. He'd seen fear before, and he knew it was always the guardian of fortune. Danger always stands between a miner and his biggest find, he said, voice cutting through the static and failing engines. If it were easy, someone else would have taken it long ago. His resolve reignited theirs. The crew steadied their nerves, gripped their tools, and pushed on. They weren't just mining for gold anymore. They were finishing what those men in 1898 had begun. Each strike of the shovel felt heavier, each creak of the earth louder, but they pressed forward. Then came the moment that changed everything, the payoff. At first, it was subtle, a faint shimmer in the pan. Under the glare of the floodlights, flakes of gold glinted so pure they seemed to glow against the black sand. The crew gathered close, breath fogging in the cold air, as Chris swirled the pan with practiced precision. A tilt, a swirl, and there it was. Color. Not dust, not specks, but solid, gleaming flakes. Someone whispered that it was the richest test pan they'd ever seen. Moments later, the excavator struck deeper pay. The gravel spilled out, and mixed within were gold nuggets so large they made seasoned miners gasp. Pieces the size of thumbs, heavy and cold, scattered across the table with sharp metallic clicks that echoed through the camp. The crew erupted in disbelief and joy. Whispers spread fast. This wasn't just a strike. It was monumental, the kind of discovery that could outshine even Parker Schnabel's biggest season. But amid the chaos, Chris remained composed. His eyes stayed fixed on the pit. "This is just the start," he told them calmly. "What we've hit is only the surface. The real treasure's still below." He reminded them that the deeper they went, the more dangerous it would get, but also the greater the reward. Excitement simmered beneath the exhaustion as the crew pressed on, knowing they were on the edge of rewriting Klondike history. By dawn, word had already spread. Across the valley, miners whispered that something massive was happening at Doumitt's claim. Curious eyes began to appear along the ridges. At first, a few wanderers pretending to pass by, then full crews lingering too long, binoculars flashing in the sunlight. Within days, the perimeter was crawling with rivals hungry for information. Then came the sabotage. Hoses mysteriously sliced open in the night, fuel tanks tampered with, generators sputtering out mid-shift. What began as minor disruptions soon grew deliberate. The crew took turns patrolling the site, lanterns swinging, rifles in hand. Their dig site was no longer just a gold claim. It had become a fortress under siege. Would you like me to continue the next section? From when the sabotage escalates into a full-on confrontation that nearly costs Chris everything. Chris refused to be rattled. When word of the sabotage reached him, he didn't flinch. He laughed, the sound carrying through the cold, still air of the Klondike night. "If they're trying to slow us down," he said with a grin, "it means we're getting close." His steady confidence lit a spark in the crew. Fear turned to adrenaline, and determination replaced fatigue. Around them, tension crackled through the valley. Rival miners watched from the ridges, realizing they weren't just witnessing a dig. They were watching history unfold and slipping out of their grasp. Every hour, the air grew heavier, as if the entire Yukon was holding its breath for what was about to happen next. Then it came, a hollow, echoing rumble from deep underground. Days of cautious excavation had led them here. The final wooden barrier, blackened with rot, gave way under their tools. Beyond it lay a void, a hidden chamber untouched for more than a century. Flashlights cut into the darkness, beams dancing over the walls until they caught a glint that froze everyone where they stood. The dull gleam of ore, the unmistakable shine of gold. They moved forward, hearts pounding. What the light revealed was beyond anything they'd imagined. Barrels, scattered and half sunk into the dirt, their rims bursting with gold-rich gravel. Nuggets clung to the wood like frost. It looked as though the miners of 1898 had simply dropped their tools and walked away, expecting to return, but never did. Handfuls of fine gold sifted through the crew's fingers like grains of sunlight. For a long moment, no one said a word. The truth was all around them, impossible to deny. One of the men hauled a barrel onto a scale, the wood creaking under its own weight. The reading flashed, and jaws dropped. Millions, from just one. They tested another and another, until the numbers became almost meaningless. The chamber wasn't myth or rumor, it was real. A vault sealed in time, filled with a fortune lost to history. The total estimate left them speechless. $70 million. The map, the whispers, the warnings. Every danger they'd faced had led them to this moment. Gold glinted across the walls, shimmering in the beam of their lights, casting the room in a glow so bright it looked unreal. But through it all, Chris stayed composed. His eyes swept the chamber, not with greed, but with focus. He was already thinking ahead to how they would extract it, how they'd protect it, what new risks might come now that the secret was finally out. He reached down and lifted one of the massive nuggets from the pile. Its weight surprised him, heavier than anything he'd ever held. The gold's glow spilled across his dirt-streaked face, reflecting years of hardship, doubt, and perseverance. This was more than treasure. It was vindication. For a long moment, he just stared at it, breathing hard, the emotion catching in his throat. Then softly, he said the words that would echo far beyond the chamber. Worth every mile, every year. The crew erupted. Cheers, laughter, and tears filled the underground vault. Men who had bled for this dig, who'd faced sabotage, collapse, and fear, now stood shoulder to shoulder in victory. This wasn't just another haul. It was the find that would go down in Klondike legend. The skeptics who'd mocked Chris, the rivals who'd written him off, they all fell silent. No one could deny the truth anymore. Chris Doumitt had made history. As the celebration quieted, Chris took a long look around the chamber. His eyes softened. "This one's for them," he murmured, to the ghosts of the miners who had built the shaft, carved the warnings, and hidden their gold only to vanish into time. He dedicated the discovery to those who'd come before, men whose dream had died in the frozen dark. Tonight, under the golden light of their unfinished story, he finished what they had started. By morning, the news didn't spread. It exploded. Every camp in the valley was alive with the same words. Chris Doumitt hit 70 million. Within days, the story raced beyond the Yukon, across Canada, the US, and overseas. Reporters flooded the airstrips, investors rushed to stake claims, and rival miners tore into old ground like madmen. The Klondike was alive again, louder, hungrier, and more electric than it had been since the 1890s. Equipment prices soared overnight. Abandoned claims were suddenly worth fortunes. Old dredges were fired back up, rust shaking loose as prospectors returned to ground they'd once written off as empty. Chris's strike had reignited the gold fever. The gold rush wasn't just history anymore, it was happening again. Historians arrived on site, their skepticism replaced by awe. They compared the chamber to the journals of lost prospectors from 1898, and every detail matched. The sealed shaft, the barrels, even the carved warning were all there. Pages once dismissed as tall tales were now verified records of truth. Scholars admitted they had underestimated the old legends. The find didn't just rewrite history, it confirmed it. And at the center of it all stood Chris Doumitt, the man who had once been seen as the loyal worker in Parker Schnabel's crew had now become something far greater, a legend in his own right. His name rippled across the mining world, his story shared in every camp, every headline. He wasn't a side character anymore. He was the story, the miner who found the unfindable. As the gold was hauled out barrel by barrel, Chris's legacy became undeniable. He had proven that persistence could outlast time, that legends could be real, and that sometimes the quietest man in the room carries the biggest story. Fans around the world hailed him as proof that true grit can still uncover greatness. Younger miners looked up to him, not just as a veteran, but as the embodiment of what every prospector dreams of becoming. For Chris, though, the gold wasn't just wealth. It was redemption. Every long season, every blister, every doubt, it had all led to this. His triumph wasn't measured in dollars, but in legacy. The man who had once stood in someone else's shadow now stood as the brightest name in modern Klondike history. The chamber still gleamed. The barrels still stood heavy with treasure. And in the midst of it all, Chris Doumitt stood quietly, a man holding not just gold, but a story that would outlast every ounce of it. Would you like me to craft the next continuation, where the aftermath shows how the discovery transforms Chris's life, draws global attention, and sets off a fierce modern gold rush among rivals?